Good morning. This is Monday, February 3rd, 2025. My name is Lorette Carter, and on behalf of our Toole County librarian Heidi Alford and librarian staff member Tanner Dean, I would like to welcome Mr. Dean Hellinger, lifelong Toole County resident. We're going to spend the next few minutes visiting with Mr. Hellinger on his homesteading family, his life, and getting a glimpse of historic Toole County. So first, Dean, I'll let you start by introducing yourself, a little bit about your personal history, your age, a little bit about your family tree.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I'm Dean Hellinger. I was born in Shelby here in 1934, so I'm 90 years old. And my maternal grandparents homesteaded in Devon in 1909. Grandfather Hibbard was his name. Came from England. He came to Chicago with two brothers to work in the Pullman railroad car business. He was a machinist, and he met a girl from Indiana. She was a farm girl, and they got married. And she had a brother who had a sawmill over by Stryker, Montana, and he came out to work in the sawmill. And he actually filed on it. I didn't even know there was such a thing, but he filed on a logging claim or a forest claim. And then when the homesteading opened over here on the open plains, he filed right north of Devon, 1 mile north of Devon. The barn is still there. And they came here on the train. My mother was 18 months old, and their house wasn't even done. They were having somebody build a house and build the barn. So apparently they had enough money to get a settlement started. And they stayed with the railroad people for a few months before their house was done. And my mother started school in Devon, and she tells the story of she went to school in Devon, which is a little less than a mile from their house. And she came home the first day and she said, "I want to be a teacher." She was so impressed with school, but she did become a teacher. But my grandfather wasn't a farmer, knew nothing about farming, but he did the usual things. He fenced the place, and he broke up the 40 acres, and they farmed the 40 acres or whatever. And my grandmother used to sell butter and eggs in Devon, and which was close, of course. And Grandpa worked as a blacksmith. He was a community blacksmith. But unfortunately, his idea was to prove up the 320 acres that the government had given him, and after his 3 years it became his, and he was going to sell it and use the money to do something else. Well, the years went by, and 1917 came, and after 15 and 16, which were good agricultural years because of the prices for World War I, we were feeding Europe. Right. And prices were good. Grandpa had some money, and he decided to sell, and he sold. So he sold the homestead in 1917. Unfortunately, 1917 was the first year of the drought. And 1918 was the second year of the drought. And the guy that had bought it couldn't make payments, and so Grandpa had to take it back. So in 1919, he was stuck here with no experience in farming. Prices were terrible, and agricultural prices were terrible selling things, and he couldn't raise anything anyway because it was so dry. And so he lost the place for taxes. And those grandparents moved to the Flathead Valley and set up a little strawberry farm and lived out their lives over there. The other side of the family, the Hellingers, interesting enough, came in 1919, or came in 1917 actually. They bought land when Grandpa Hellinger was living in the country south of Spokane, the Palouse country, Whitman County, the premier wheat country in the world, really wonderful country. And he didn't have enough land. He had a growing family, he had 5 kids, and he needed more land. And so he had money in 1917 after the war, and he bought land in Montana because this land was flat. the land over there is very hilly, and we always laugh at them because they live over there. But he bought this land, and he sent a nephew over to farm in 17. Well, the nephew couldn't raise anything because it was dry, and the nephew couldn't raise anything in 18 either. And by 1919, Grandpa couldn't keep both places. And so the family story is he sold the good place in Washington and moved to Montana. And they had a struggle, I'll tell you, going through the teens and the 20s is just terrible. But anyway, they made a go of it. And in the meantime, my mother had grown up in the Flathead Valley near Creston, and she stayed with a friend in Kalispell to go to school. And she graduated when she was 17 and went to summer school at the University of Montana, teachers training. And she said she didn't learn anything there, but she spent the summer there. And she started teaching a rural school, 8 grades, in the area between Kalispell and Whitefish when she was 17 years old, 2 months before her 18th birthday. She said she was fortunate she had a good superintendent of schools who knew things and would come by occasionally and tell her things, and she learned that way. But the following year, she learned that they paid more over in Devon, and she still remembered Devon. So she came to Devon, and she taught there for 2 years, and she met my dad and got married and lived there ever since.
How big was Devon at that point?
Devon was about 300 people, they told me at one time. A lot of homesteaders, of course.
Yes.
I had a visit the last year from a National Geographic photographer, and I was telling him he had just come to Montana from Brazil. He had been taking pictures of agricultural goings on an agricultural coffee plantation, and he wanted to take shelter belt pictures in Montana. So he flew into Montana. This is so funny. He flew into Bozeman, and then he got a plane ride to Kalispell. And he arrived in Kalispell, or in Cutbank, excuse me, came to Cutbank, just when we were having the class reunions here,
Sure.
and there was no place to stay. So he and our grown daughter stayed overnight in the airport in Kalispell, in Cutbank. But I was telling him, when this was homesteaded, the township where I live now, 5 miles north of town, had 72 families living out here. 36 square miles, 2 for every square mile. So there are a lot of people in the country in those days. Certainly changed now.
Yes.
A lot of change.
Yeah. Devon had a bank at that time.
Bank had 2 banks.
2 banks. Multiple lumber companies. One lumber company.
Oh yes, sure.
Yeah.
And the school was built in 1912, burned down in 14.
Oh.
My mother has a story about that too. She started school, the school had burned down in November, and they didn't have a school yet when she started the school. And they had school in one of the local saloons. And she said their desk was planks on whiskey barrels as a starter.
Oh my
But that school was built in 14, and I went preschool, like 6 weeks in that building, and then the school didn't have enough students to maintain that larger building, so they moved in 2 rural schools from out of town, and one became the teachage and one became the school, and I started the school there.
They literally moved the buildings.
Yes.
Yes.
Bill McCarter, who was a
Yeah.
local farmer, says he helped move one of the buildings in from south of Devon. He said, we just wrapped a chain around it and drug it in, which is probably true.
Exactly.
And the other building actually was 1 mile north of my grandfather's homestead. And my brother started to school there. He went to school there for 1 year, and then they started school in Devon. In those days, of course, there were no school buses, no
Right.
busing at all. You had to provide your own transportation.
Right.
But I went to school in Devon for 5 years, and then my parents thought we should have more experiences, so they moved us to Shelby. And there were no buses, so we stayed in town with my grandparents, who lived right down the street from the museum here,
Mm-hmm.
and we went to school there through high school.
a lot of children did that. Did they not live in town, not necessarily with their parents?
Yes,
Yes.
very true.
Yeah,
Mhm.
in order to
That was a
receive
great
further
experience.
education.
Everybody says, "Did you get a ride to school?" I said, "Well, it's only 2 blocks away."
Right, it's not that far.
Oh, lucky, yeah, lucky.
Yeah, very good. Thank you for sharing that. So what? So in thinking about prove up. So your grandparents both proved up on their land. Is that correct?
No, the Hellinger side of the family, they bought land.
Okay.
Had money after selling the land
Okay.
in Washington,
Yes.
which was
Yeah.
good land,
Yes.
and bought the land in Montana.
Gotcha.
And as I said, they had quite a struggle during the 20s and 30s. They raised cattle, they raised horses, and then broke land. Of course, had a lot of farming,
Yes.
but it was a struggle.
Right. Yeah. Goodness. So did they encourage other family members then to come, or was?
That's interesting. I always thought about my poor grandmother. She moved out here in Montana. She left the Palouse country south of Spokane. They had a stream running through the yard. They had an orchard.
Mm-hmm.
You know, moved out here, you couldn't see a tree. You know, there wasn't a tree in the home country, and no water. You know, they had to haul
Yes.
water.
Yes.
You know, for years and years, 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 had to haul water, no water at all. And they did eventually plant trees, but it took a long time.
Gosh, yeah. They were brave souls to come to northern Montana. Wasn't that the truth?
My other grandmother, that where they lost the place in Devon,
Mhm.
she said, you know, the 10 years we were in Devon, they were the best years. The kids were growing up and things were good,
Right.
and they lost everything.
Yeah. Hmm. Very interesting. And it's probably the friends and the people that surrounded them that made it so special as well. So.
Yeah, Mother tells stories about, you know, visiting the neighbors and things
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah, that's great. So during that time, what would kind of explain their agricultural methods? Because it's not like today's modern machinery by any means. It was very hard work.
Yeah. There's a picture of my grandfather's tractor in 1923. In fact, if you look at the museum here in town, the wheel from the tractor is down there as a sign. It was a 1923 tractor. But prior to that, in the, well, it'd be 21, 22, it was all done with horses.
Right.
And Grandpa was a horseman. He was very disappointed that his grandchildren didn't like horses. But he had horses all the time. But they had started right off farming with tractors.
Correct.
But it seems very primitive. When I was growing up, my dad had a band of sheep. In fact, I learned to drive herding sheep. They don't pick up all out on the prairie.
Sure.
But there was a lot of, in the 40s, there was a lot of the land in this country that was still grass, or had gone back to grass after the homesteaders left. And farming really didn't get on a profitable basis until after World War II.
Yeah. Amazing. So tell us a little bit earlier, you were mentioning the communities along the High Line. Tell us a little bit about what you were just mentioning about somewhat alphabetical in naming of these communities, and was it all Jim Hill's Railroad that brought all these communities to life? Or?
Sure,
Yes.
It was. You know, the railroad came through Shelby in 1890, I think it was, and most of the towns were named after, or named by the railroad, by
Right.
railroad people.
Mhm.
I can remember when my dad was growing up, he went to school here in high school, and then he went to the university to play football. He played football for the Grizzly practice team, but apparently didn't get a scholarship and didn't have any money, and came home. Then he got a job working in the oil field because in 22 oil had been struck. And then he got a job managing the oil station in Rudyard, the Farmers Union oil station. And at one time he managed the oil station in Devon as well. And somewhere along in those lines, he was also helping his dad and brother farm. and got married to the local school teacher, my mother, in 1929, and farmed ever since.
Yes.
And it was interesting, an interesting time of consolidation, because the farmers, a lot of the land was still owned by original homesteaders, and they remembered what happened after World War One. The bottom dropped out of everything after World War One, because there was no longer a big market in Europe. The prices dropped in everything, and at the same time, of course, Montana was still recovering from the drought. It was a terrible time. And when my dad started farming probably about the time he got married, or soon after, it was 1930s, he started buying land. He needed land, and farming was improving. Prices were improving after World War II. And the original homesteaders were selling out, because they remembered that after World War I, the price dropped out of everything. Prices had been up $35 an acre during the early years, and then nothing. You couldn't give it away. Right. There was no grass, there was no water, you couldn't raise it. It was a terrible time. Well, by 1940, things were improving, and by 1946 or so, a lot of the homesteaders were selling out, and Dad started buying land. And over the years, acquired quite a bit of land, to the point where my brother and I ended up farming it all. Mm-hmm. But that was the general thing. I think of all the places where people lived when I was a youngster, and there's nobody out there anymore. Nobody out there.
Yeah, exactly. I read in past, things that I've come across that the railroad brought in experts to help those homesteaders learn some of their farming methods. Did you remember that as any part of your family history, or?
No, I've read about that.
Yes.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah, they promoted the area.
Right.
As what was the expression? Plowing will bring the rain, or whatever.
Yeah.
Anyway, it didn't.
It did not.
It didn't, no. It was always a struggle.
Right. And sheep were probably the most adept to living on the desolate prairies, or what did you experience?
Our experience was fairly limited. I don't remember what year Dad got sheep, but I was quite young, and they were gone when I was about 10 or 11, I guess.
Oh, so not a long time that he had raised sheep.
Yeah.
And then went to cattle?
No, they were all farming.
That's strictly farming at that point.
But I grew up on a farm, typical farm, and you had cows. Mm-hmm. Always a couple of milk cows, always a few beef cattle, always had pigs, always had chickens.
Yeah.
All had those things.
To sustain your own family's needs.
Yeah.
More than anything.
Right.
Yeah.
Always tried to raise the garden. Didn't have enough water.
Right.
There wasn't any water in those days. Always hauled water.
How did you store water back then? How was that?
Cistern.
Okay, so there was like wooden built cisterns, or what did they? Oh, interesting. Okay.
I remember the house we lived in was a three-room house, and one bedroom, one kitchen, and one living room.
Right.
And that was it.
Right.
And then as we got older, they built a dormer upstairs for the boys.
Yeah.
Bedroom.
Mm-hmm.
But it had a pump in the kitchen, and that the cistern was under the house, or close to the house.
Yeah.
And that was the only water there was.
Right.
That was it. In fact, the two things that have changed most is probably the water and the electricity. Mm-hmm. We didn't have electricity when I was growing up, but we had, at one time, we had a natural gas light in the kitchen.
Oh.
In the late 30s, early 40s, they drilled some wells, and there was a natural gas well fairly close to the house. So we had free gas, and it was a very nice well, in the sense that it was one of those great, huge pressure wells,
Yes.
It had a little bit, so you could tame it down and use it, and we used it in everything.
Oh my goodness.
And we had a natural gas refrigerators too. That was the first refrigerator.
All the conveniences.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I suppose Dad mentioned this if you did his interview about bringing electricity here. in 1945, I can remember going around with my dad, talking to the neighbors to get them to sign up that they would buy electricity for at least 10 years. $10 a month for 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
And this was quite a struggle for some of the homesteaders.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't want to be tied up to any
Right, long-term commitments.
anything.
Yeah.
But we signed up to neighbors, and he was the first president of the Bryce River Electric.
Yeah, that's how the cooperative was built.
That's how it started.
That's,
I can remember we used to go to the state fair in Great Falls every year.
mm-hmm.
I remember driving home one time and looking out, seeing all the lights out toward Fairfield.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, someday it'll be that way up our way too.
Oh.
And then when we got electricity in 1946, I think, when the electricity finally came, you could stand out in the yard and you could see the neighbors. Everybody put up a light pole with the light on it
Yes.
to show that they had electricity.
Yeah.
But electricity was, it changed everything.
Yes, it did. Yeah.
We had sheep at that time, and I remember we got a electric pump to pump water out of the well to water the system, the sheep,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
which is quite
Right.
interesting.
That is amazing. I remember the history of the Bryce River Electric, and that's right, that your dad was the first president, and that is incredible. Good.
I have to tell a story about our house at that time was heated with natural gas. We had a little well out in the pasture, and we had a floor furnace. And Dad went to Washington, D.C. to sign the papers to get the money to start it all.
Mm-hmm.
And while he was gone, the gas line froze up. Now, the gas line often froze up, but Dad knew what to do. And there was what was called a chloride pot. And the gas would come from the well through the chloride pot, which would take the water out, and then it'd go on into the house. Well, I was, 8 or 9 years old, 10 maybe. We had never been taught how to do that. So we were in the house, and every day it got colder because there was less and less gas coming through. But eventually Dad came home and brought electricity as well.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
So many of your neighbors, did they have the luxury of a natural gas well near them, or how did they heat their homes? Or
Well, originally most people heated it with coal.
okay,
And coal came in on
the
the railroad,
Mhm.
or if you're closer to the hills, it came from the McDermott coal mine
Okay.
up there. And my mother tells the story of coal. I don't think we ever burned coal when I was there, but when I was quite young, there was still coal in the basement. By that time, we were burning fuel oil.
Yeah.
But Mother tells the story. She got all ready to go to something which was unusual because she had the two little boys to take care of. And I was the youngest, my brother was 2 years older. And she got us all ready to go, that she was getting ready. And we had disappeared. And she looked for us, and we were in the basement. And my brother was pouring coal over me.
You were black.
Yes, black. And I don't know the end of that story, but I don't know if she
Right.
cleaned us all up or what.
Oh my
But that was
gosh.
the only coal I remember.
Right.
Yeah.
Interesting. And your your free time, if there's any for a farming family, there isn't a lot of that. Did you enjoy the river? Did you go to Tiber? What was some of your?
Always went to Tiber on 4th of July,
Mhm.
Turner Park.
Okay.
Turner Park was there was a bridge across the Bryce River, which brought the southern part of the county into Galata to do business.
Mm-hmm.
And that was I suppose it was a county park, but it had a caretaker who lived there in the summer, and a house, and people would go there and they'd have rodeo and kids things,
Right.
It's
Right
always
at the
fun.
park there,
Yeah.
and just to enjoy the lake. Yeah.
We have a picture of my Hibbard grandparents, that's my mother's folks, on the Marias with probably another family. There were probably about 8 people in the picture early.
Mm-hmm.
But it must have been quite an adventure, to get down to the Marias.
Exactly. Yeah. Communities, baseball teams.
Yes.
Yeah. I've seen pictures, and I think someone famous played baseball on one of our teams in this region. I want to say it was Jesse Owens, but I'm not positive.
Mhm.
But I think there is.
We have that picture here.
Do
Yeah.
you? Okay.
Mhm.
Can you tell us a little bit about that? Do you remember much of the history of this
Well,
Olympic athlete playing on?
Well, baseball was very important. Every town had one.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a story about when Toole County was going to be formed in 1914.
Uh-huh.
It was basically between Devon and Shelby on where it would be placed.
Mm-hmm.
And the story is that the Devon team, baseball team, had beat the team in Dunkirk. So the Dunkirk people voted for Shelby, and Shelby got to
That's
be the
right.
county seat. Makes a good story anyway.
It's a great story. Yes.
Shelby had the advantage, two things. One thing, it had two railroads, north and south, as well as east and
Right.
west, and it had water. The other towns never got water in the
Right.
early days. So that's one of the
So
things.
Shelby was able to thrive
Yeah.
somewhat more than some of the smaller communities along the Great Northern.
You know, if people come back to Shelby for reunions like they're going to this year,
Mm-hmm.
they always mark about how many trees there are.
Yeah.
50 years ago there weren't trees.
Right.
Great
Right.
difference.
Isn't that something?
Yes.
Because we think there's hardly any trees still
Yes.
here. So, but it is much more so than what it was. You
Quite
bet.
different, yeah.
You're right. That's amazing. Very good. Let's see. Well, let's move in history to a time of the Dempsey-Gibbons fight. You know so much about that from your father was there?
He was, yeah.
Yes.
There's a family story on that too.
Yep.
My dad would have been 24, he would have been 21.
Mm-hmm.
And my Aunt Beulah, who was a couple of years older, was working at the courthouse.
Mm-hmm.
And they had a younger brother who was in their teens. He was still in high school. They all went to the fight. Dad and Beulah had tickets, and Lloyd didn't.
Mm-hmm.
He went in after the
When they
gate went
crashed the
down
fences.
and sat next to him.
He got in the cheap
Just
way.
yeah, he was one of those.
Yeah. Do you remember them telling you about it?
No,
About
never
the-
did. We never talked about that.
Isn't
I
that
often
interesting?
think about that.
Yeah.
He never mentioned it.
Right.
Beulah never mentioned it. Dad never mentioned it.
Hmm.
Mother said she was in town. She was younger. She was in town staying with an uncle, but she didn't go to the fight.
Right. It probably was a lot for local people to take in, the immenseness of the fight and all that was going around. It was almost too
I think
much.
it's hard to imagine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And did you not tell me a story about, that Tommy Gibbons and his wife lived in Shelby for a time leading up to the fight?
Oh, yes.
And he brought in a piano for her. Is that, can you
Which is
retell
still here.
that story? Yes.
You know, the James Smith's
Yes.
house. That
At 700 Main Street.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
Because the house was brand new, and they rented it for the Gibbonses.
Mm-hmm.
And Mrs. Gibbons played the piano, and
Great.
Mr. Gibbons bought her the piano, and she would play the piano for all the visiting
Yes.
sports and people, as well as the newspaper people. There were a lot of famous newspaper people,
Right.
and the piano stayed in the house, and eventually ended up with the Burns family.
Okay.
They apparently rented that house at one time, and they were going to build their mortuary right on the corner.
Mm-hmm.
And the people didn't want to build a mortuary there, so they moved downtown and built it where it is now.
Okay.
And Mrs. Burns now has the piano. She played it for us.
Oh, that's wonderful. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's got a great history. And we just celebrated, of course, the 100th anniversary not that long ago. And a lot of those family members, particularly Tommy Gibbons' families, came back and were so enamored with Shelby and just how Tommy Gibbons and his family were treated when they were living here and preparing for the fight. So it's kind of neat to see that history all over again and the love for Shelby that they
It
had.
is. I still correspond Facebook with Gibbonses.
Oh, good. With Gerard?
Yeah,
Yeah.
and his wife.
Yes.
She just did a Facebook about Los Angeles burning. She said it wasn't burning their part of town, but she said a lot of friends were.
Yeah, I imagine. Yeah, very frightening. Very good. Well, that's great. What do you now? Let's move on to some of the things that you've seen through time in your young 90 years. Some of the things that have struck you as most memorable changes or events that have kind of changed your world or our world as we know it, that you feel are most significant.
You don't realize the changes when they're changing.
Yes.
You look back and you see them.
Mhm.
Electricity obviously was one.
Right.
Water is another. We have a community water system now, the Colorado water system. So we get water delivered right to the house now rather than having hauled. But we hauled water for 60 years, you know. And the nearest water was better water than we get now from a spring in
Right.
Seagrass Hills.
Mhm.
And it was 20 miles to that.
That was quite an engineering feat to run 20 miles of wooden pipe, right, at that point?
No.
What was it?
Well, the pipe now,
No, that was originally run from to your farms.
or you hauled it with your truck.
Oh, okay, yeah. But the water that you drove to
Yes.
and got out of the hills.
As
Yeah.
I said, it's very good water.
Yeah. Yeah.
Great water. But hauling water was one of the best jobs on the farm.
Mm-hmm.
Two reasons. One is you got off by yourself. And the other thing was if someone was ahead of you, and often there'd be more than one truck weight water, because it's kind of a slow process, you'd get a sort of a vacation. I always took a book.
Yes.
You
Yeah.
could always read. And it was green up there.
Yeah.
You know, what wasn't a lot
Mhm.
north of Devon.
Mm-hmm.
But wasn't so much fun in the winter.
I imagine not.
Hauling water is not fun in the winter. But you had to do it too.
Right. And the springs continued through winter months, the coldest of
Oh, yeah.
winter months. Yes.
Mhm.
Yeah. And it was at Gold Butte where the spring was, or where was the spring? Middle Butte, Gold Butte?
It's between the few buttes,
Okay.
south of Middle Butte.
Okay.
Sort of.
Interesting.
But it was a big job, and I remember when we got electricity in '46, all the neighbors got together and built bigger cisterns
Mm-hmm.
because we had water and you could
Yes.
have a inside
Mm-hmm.
plumbing.
And you do that. That's how agricultural communities thrive, right? By neighbors helping one another.
That's true.
Yes.
A lot
Yeah.
of that.
Each helping to build and getting it all accomplished together.
When I started farming with my brother in 57 was our first crop. And I can remember we went out, we did custom cutting, custom farming. We did custom spraying.
Mm-hmm.
We did custom swathing,
Sure.
things like that.
Yeah.
You know,
That's amazing. Yeah. And supplemented your own farm income from that
yes.
custom, all the custom work. That's
It was
wonderful.
before. Well, custom cutting was just coming in.
Oh,
you
okay.
know.
Yes, right.
But now it's-
Yeah. So tell us about some of your neighbors. Some of those names that we that have some of us have long forgotten. Some of those neighbors.
Well, let's see. There was a childless couple lived about 4 miles away. They had originally come from Nebraska. Several families come, and in farming in the area north of Devon, homesteaded fairly close to us, and we would visit them occasionally. They were original homesteaders. They were older than my grandparents, or my parents,
Mhm.
more my grandparents' age, but they were nice people. And I remember visiting them, and they had a 36-volt electric wind charger.
Oh.
They had big batteries in the basement, and they had a refrigerator. The
Oh
first
my gosh,
refrigerator I
luxury.
ever saw, which is really exciting.
Yes.
And they were, like I said, they had relatives. And I was working here at the museum one time, and a couple came in, and they were relatives
Oh.
of these people, and they remember visiting here in the 30s, and how the rest of the families all moved away in the 20s when the drought came, and they had letters from the people in Montana to the people in Nebraska, and the people from Nebraska to the people in Montana, talking about how horrible it was in 1919. There was no grass, there was no water, there were no schools for the kids. They didn't know what to do. There was no market. You couldn't sell the cattle. They didn't want to lose everything and go back to Nebraska, but that's what eventually happened. Fabulous letters. I think there's a copy of them here somewhere. Really interesting.
Yeah, the
Now,
difficult
they
times.
farmed, the couple that lived there, they farmed there until probably in the late 40s, but they were one of those that sold out. And just north of them, there was another couple, also family, childless. He was from the Midwest someplace, and he was a jack of all trades. Knew how to do everything. I remember he laid the brick for the chimney in our house. And when the electricity came in, he became an electrician. He did the electrician. And he had a wonderful house, little house that he had built. And they had a barn, which he had built. And they had a chicken house, which he had built. And everything was painted, kept up, and really nice. And he and his wife lived there. We visited them a few times, too. And they also sold out probably in the 40s.
Yeah. Any other homesteading neighbors that are still there, or descendants out there that you can remember?
Not really, no.
Yeah.
No.
It's,
I'm all alone.
yeah. Are you in your family home then, out, or do you have you have a different home? It's on the same land, but a different home from your family home?
The grandfather's place is where Ruby Bustle is.
Okay.
She inherited that, and I live about a mile away.
Okay.
And I was, after I went to the University of Montana, as you can see.
Yes, proudly. Good for you.
And after I graduated, I was in the Army for a couple of years, and then I came home. While I was in the Army, I was going to retire. I was going to either sell out, or if we wanted, we could take over the place. So my brother, who had just gotten out of the Air Force, and I agreed to give it a try.
Right.
And I said, well, I'm going to be gone for a couple of years in the Army, but if you want to run it till I come home, we'll see. And so I came home, and like I said, we took over in 1957. And I think we tried for 10 years to pay for the machinery. It took us 12 years. And then we started buying the land, and it took us 20 years to buy the land. And
Yeah.
here we are.
Amazing.
A
Amazing.
lot of changes.
Yeah. Tell
lot
us
of
about those.
In the last, I got retired 20 years ago, 25 years ago. And it's a totally different agricultural world. No till. You don't plow the ground anymore.
Right.
Chemicals are different. Machinery is totally different. Varieties are different.
Right.
Everybody in this country knows about strip cropping. Strip cropping was adopted during the 30s to stop wind erosion. Wind erosion is a
Right.
terrible problem in this country. And the Canadians developed this system of when alternate crops of plowing and seeding.
Right.
And that helped. But it wasn't enough. You'll get dry years and
Yes.
it would still blow.
Right.
And now no-till has come in, and nobody knows what's going to happen now, because
Right.
the strips have gone out because farming strips is expensive and inefficient. And so things have gone to blocks now. If you take pictures of the area
Oh,
now, you
interesting.
get big blocks, and the big problem is fire, one thing. Other thing is if you get a series of dry years and you don't have residue on that land, it's going to blow too. So we'll wait and see what's going to happen.
Right. Did your family plant much of the shelter belts that you talked about, that this National Geographic photographer wanted to get some pictures?
In 1963, we had gone through a bunch of dry years, a lot of wind blowing in, and my brother and I got together and we didn't want to see that any longer, and so we looked into the shelter belts. We planted 98 miles of field shelter belts. 4 years we planted 50,000. 6 years we planted 50,000 a year.
Of Caragana, lilac?
Caraganas.
Caragana, yeah.
Which we got from the state nursery and
Yes.
planted.
Yeah.
And they're still there.
Yeah,
And they catch a lot of snow, and they do stop blowing.
you bet.
But you can't block it.
Yeah.
As I said, it's
Right.
expensive, and so most people aren't interested.
Yeah, that's a shame. And the majority of your crops were wheat?
Mostly wheat. We raised some barley, but
Mhm.
mostly wheat.
Yeah. And sold through the local elevators? Is that your general method that, yeah,
Yeah, it was all sold locally.
right.
That's something that's changed too. The local
it has.
elevators have closed, and that's because of the transportation problem. The railroads wanted to be more efficient by going to just the terminal elevators where they could load a whole train at one time. They saved a lot of money. So they gave a better rate to the terminals, and so the country elevators closed.
Right.
So now a lot of the country elevators will either be torn down or been sold to some local
Right.
farmer who's using them.
Using it personally, yeah.
Yeah.
And those were part of our history, is all the, the landscape was all the grain elevators along the High Line. And they're disappearing, as you said.
Yeah.
Very few left along the High Line. Well, tell us some other things that that have disappeared that you've noticed over the years, that you've seen change, not only your farming methods and but just in general that you've seen, particularly in north central Montana.
Well, there are a lot fewer people.
Yeah.
Just a lot fewer people.
Mhm.
A lot of the businesses have left the smaller towns because they can do business from Billings or Great
Yes.
Falls.
Yeah. Right.
Like we used to have mail trains,
Mhm.
and those people lived here and get on the train and work. They live here anymore.
Right.
Montana Power used to have a lot more people living here
Mhm.
than the power company does now.
Mhm.
Same with the telephone company, don't have many people living here.
That's right.
A lot of those companies have been consolidated
Mhm.
into the bigger places.
Right.
So there's been a lot of changes in the schools. Like I started living in a little rural school.
Mhm.
At one time, there were over 100 rural schools in Toole County. About about 8 miles, they tried to have a school. So you only had to walk 4 miles,
Right.
and that's it, which was the best.
Yeah.
But now all those have disappeared, almost all of those have
Right.
just disappeared.
Yes. Exactly.
And that is one of the things. The original country was settled by a lot of bachelors, and bachelors married the women teachers.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of, like my mother.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people did that.
Yes. Yeah.
There used to be a lot more high schools
Yeah. That's true.
consolidated too,
Yeah.
because there's transportation.
Yeah.
Used to be no buses.
Yes. Now, speaking of schools, so you went to grade school where the fire hall is now, or where was when you moved into town, or were you a little older when you moved
It's the
into
building
town?
that burned down.
Right. Tell us about that. Do you remember that?
Yeah, I went to 6th, 7th, and 8th grades in that building.
Right. The former.
And then one winter, my parents moved us to town.
Yeah.
And we rented a house halfway up the hill and slept through the fire.
Yeah. Right.
I was in high school and got up the next morning and the building was gone.
Gone,
But we were in
right.
high school.
So your high school is right there on 6th Avenue. That was your high school at the
Yeah.
time?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Amazing.
Yep.
And were you in town when Main Street, 1959, when the sports club and those buildings caught on fire and that huge fire that happened?
I think I was farming at the
You were
time,
farming
yeah.
at that point. That's right. You were home from the
I had
military
no
at that
idea.
point. Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. Well, tell us anything else. Any closing thoughts you might have on on, well, how about the museum? Tell us a little bit, how long have you been serving on the board of the Marias Museum?
Oh, 30 some years.
Yeah.
I'm an amateur photographer.
Well, I've seen
And I
your
had a
pictures. They don't look amateur at all.
I had a bunch of pictures of old schools.
Sure.
Actually, for the state centennial in '89,
Mhm.
I assigned myself the project of collecting pictures of old schools, and so I got around like 500 pictures eventually.
Wow.
And I decided I should give it to the museum, so I gave it to the museum, and then they elected me a director. So they're always looking for somebody.
Yeah.
And so I've been sort of in charge of the pictures around here since.
Yes, yes.
And museum it's a wonderful place. People have been very.
Tell us how the Fulton family, how that all transpired, getting this beautiful home.
It was just before my time.
Mm-hmm.
Before my time, but
Okay.
we built the new building across the street.
Yes, the annex, yes.
10 years ago, or whatever. We worked on that for a long time.
Yeah. And you needed it.
Yes, a lot. Need
Yes.
another one.
What are some of the most, what you feel the most prized museum pieces that you feel are here in our museum?
Well, I like to tell the story of one that we used to have.
Oh, okay.
We used to have a photograph in the living room, Hoffman photograph. Now,
Yes.
Hoffman was
Of Native American, beautiful Native American pictures. Is that not right?
well, yeah, he took
Yes.
a lot of pictures of Montana in the 1880s. He lived in the Army, near the Army base in Miles City.
Mm-hmm.
And anyway, Mrs. Fulton bought a large enlargement, a 3 by 5 foot enlarged photograph of his in the 1920s, $200, which would have been a lot of money.
Yes, it was, yes.
But anyway, it hung in the basement when we got the building, and we decided to move it upstairs. So it was framed, it was hanging over the fireplace in here
Yes.
for years. And about 3 or 4 years ago, Bill Fulton's daughter was here one summer, and she said, I want to take the picture. I said, what? We've been paying insurance on it all these years. And turns out that Mrs. Fulton, Bill's mother,
Yes.
had given everything in the house to this daughter
Oh.
who lives in Billings.
Oh, okay.
And so we talked it over with Bill Rolfe, who's a director and gives us advice on things. He said, I don't think you can win this one because there's no paperwork. So she came and took the picture, and she said, I'll get you a copy, which she did. And you can't tell it from the original.
Oh.
But the original is worth $40,000 now.
My gosh. What was it of? What was the picture of?
It's a picture of an Indian encampment.
Yeah.
We were going to look at it, but
Mm-hmm.
really nice picture.
Yes.
That was the most priceless thing
Yes,
here.
absolutely.
But there are a lot of historical things that I'm very proud of here. That
Yes.
people have been very generous
Yes.
to give us things that no longer exist.
Right?
That people much younger than you and I wouldn't know about.
Yeah.
But I've got.
It's wonderful. Just in looking at the pieces. I mean, just looking right here, you've got umbrellas and interesting things that are just fabulous to look at. What they're made from and incredible pieces.
That was a local donation, fairly new.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Did this come out of a store?
It went from Montana.
Yeah.
Out of
That is
the guy that gave
amazing.
it was
Yes.
from Arizona, but
Yeah.
this was mine. Boy, no, I think those paintings up there are mine. About those in Europe.
Oh, wow. That's beautiful. Very nice. And when you visiting Europe or in your military time?
No, I was visiting there in 1980,
Okay.
1960.
Yes. Yeah.
The one on the left, well, I think I bought both of them in Amsterdam.
Oh, beautiful.
Sent home.
Well, tell me, any other closing thoughts that you'd like to share with us, or is there anything that maybe Tanner or Heidi would like to ask Dean of?
When you think of going forward, as new people come in, younger people come up in the community, is there anything that you particularly would want them to know about the history?
Good question.
Yeah.
Yeah. I wish more of the younger people would visit the museum to learn the history. It's fun. We get a lot of people coming to see the Dempsey Gibbons things, obviously, but most of the younger generation doesn't really know that.
Yeah, you're right. I think most people should learn of the struggles and how incredibly brave people were to come and homestead. Like you said, your family gave up beautiful orchards and lush green creeks, and to come and try and live on the prairie and to survive and to make it. I just think
there's
that's
quite a story there, of course. I think we do a pretty good job of telling it through pictures.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty good pictures of those days.
Yes.
But like I said, things keep changing, and you don't recognize the changes until you look past and see that
Right.
the way things used to be.
Mm-hmm.
The business of school buses changed the world.
Right.
Electricity changed the world. Water changed the world.
Yes.
Totally
Yeah.
different.
You're exactly right. Well, we thank you so much for just this time together. It's just always enjoyable to visit with you. Your history and your incredible knowledge base always impresses me every time, and we just thank you. This has been a great moment.
Dean, I